There comes a moment, quietly, in the middle of an ordinary day, when everything around you feels wrong, not loud, not violent, just off, like reality itself has become too sharp, too exposed. You pick up a coffee cup, and for a second, it feels foreign, too real, too much. The light hits a wall a certain way, and you can't explain it, but the air around you grows heavier. You forget what you were about to do. You forget why you do anything at all, and that's when it happens. Sartre called it nausea, not the kind that turns your stomach, but the kind that turns your soul, the kind that doesn't come from what you ate, but from what you've believed, the kind that slowly peels away the surface of things and reveals the terrifying truth. That life, stripped of illusion, is raw, meaningless, and absurd. In his novel Nausea, Sartre gives us Roquentin, a man who begins to feel it, a historian, an observer, a man living a polite, normal life, until that normalcy begins to rot in his hands. The objects around him, a pebble, a tree root, even his own hand, begin to appear strange, slippery, wrong. He looks at them, and they look back, unblinking, not hostile, not evil, just empty, overflowing with being, but drained of meaning. It's not depression, it's not madness. It's the unbearable clarity of waking up to a world that no longer disguises itself, a world where the routines you followed don't lead anywhere, where the roles you played no longer fit, where the people around you speak in borrowed scripts, smiling, nodding, performing, but never touching anything real. And once you see that, you can't unsee it. That is the terror, Sartre wrote. Not the horror of death, but the horror of life without a mask of existence that just exists, not because it has purpose, but because it is. And suddenly, you feel it pressing in on you, the objects, the noises, the weight of your own body. All of it too much, too meaningless, too loud in its silence. And then you ask the question. You were trained never to ask, why am I here? Not in the poetic, spiritual, aspirational sense, not as a journey toward self-fulfillment, but in the most cold, naked, honest way. Why does anything exist at all? Why this chair, this hand, this breath? Sartre believed that this confrontation with existence, with being, is the beginning of truth, because before we can understand what matters, we have to face the fact that nothing has to matter. There is no divine script, no hidden moral law embedded in the universe, no celestial blueprint for your life. There is only the sheer, brute being of things, and that's the sickness, that's the nausea. It's not despair, it's not hopelessness, it's more dangerous than that. It's the moment when the scaffolding of meaning collapses, and you see the world as it is, indifferent, groundless, silent. But Sartre didn't leave us there. Nausea is not just a cry of despair. It's a door, a terrible, beautiful door that opens when you stop lying to yourself, when you stop pretending that the life you're living makes sense just because you've kept it tidy. Because underneath that nausea, underneath that collapse, there is something else, a freedom so vast, it's almost unbearable. Because if nothing has meaning, then everything is possible. Sartre wrote Nausea, not to paralyze you, but to wake you, to shake the sleep out of your bones, to pull you from the soft, quiet death of routine and make you confront the real, not the advertised, filtered, aspirational life, but the one that hums beneath your skin, the one you forgot how to feel. And maybe that's what makes it so hard. Because we don't fear meaninglessness. We fear freedom, the kind of freedom that doesn't come with a manual, the kind that doesn't reward us for obeying, the kind that forces us to invent not just what to do, but who to be. Sartre's nausea isn't a curse. It's an awakening, a brutal, honest, necessary rupture that tears through our borrowed lives and demands something real, but the cost is high. It will ask you to leave behind the comforts that made you small, the rituals that numbed your doubts, the identity that made you acceptable. It will ask you to stand alone, not as a victim, but as a creator, and most people, Sartre knew, would rather go back to sleep. But if you stay awake, if you walk through that sickness, something begins to shift. You start to see beauty, not in order, but in chaos, not in permanence, but in becoming. You begin to feel the pulse of your own existence, raw, trembling, unapproved. And in that trembling, there is truth, because when the illusions fall away, what remains is you, not the version you show others, not the role you perform, just you, empty-handed, unarmed, unfinished, and that Sartre believed is where life truly begins. Because most people are not really living. They're sleepwalking through inherited scripts. They put on names like uniforms, wear jobs like armor. They fill their days with small talk and schedules, checking boxes, performing politeness, and somewhere in the quiet, something inside them begins to rot, not from evil, but from the unbearable weight of nothing real. Sartre didn't write nausea as a metaphor. He wrote it as a diagnosis for those moments when you sit in your apartment, surrounded by furniture you chose but don't recognize, when you hear your voice say things in conversations that sound like echoes from someone else's life, when you smile in a photograph and wonder who exactly is being captured. Nausea is what happens when your existence stops pretending it. It's the physical sensation of seeing yourself as an object among objects. It's the dizziness that hits you when you realize that everything you are, every identity, every title, every desire, is a story you've been telling yourself to keep the terror away. And when that story breaks down, when you stop believing the lie, the world doesn't collapse, it just continues, indifferently, awkwardly, terrifyingly, because the truth is, you were never necessary. Nothing about your being was inevitable. You are not a fixed point. You are a contingency, a question mark wrapped in skin. And the moment you realize that the things you once leaned on, beliefs, rules, even love, can feel like paper scaffolding in a storm. Sartre. This nausea is not depression. It's not melancholy. It's revelation. It is the moment you see the machinery of meaning and realize it's made of cardboard. You see that your job doesn't define you, that your memories don't guarantee your future, that even your body, that familiar vessel, can feel like a stranger when looked at too closely. You sit in a cafe and watch the people around you, and suddenly, every gesture feels absurd. The way they stir sugar into coffee, the way they nod politely, the way their mouths move as if rehearsing lines from an invisible script. And then you wonder, do I look like that to that? Is the horror Sartre captured not some dramatic collapse, but the slow, quiet, inescapable awareness that there is no script, no stage, no audience, just being infinite, unshaped, indifferent being pressing against you like static, and in that static, you feel exposed. You realize you've been performing, not out of dishonesty, but out of fear. Fear of the void, fear of being seen without your roles, fear of admitting that you don't know what this life is for. But Sartre would say that fear is freedom knocking, because once you feel the nausea, once you see through the illusion, you cannot go back. You can try, you can busy yourself, you can chase success, or escape into pleasure, or drown in ideology. But a part of you will always remember, none of this is solid, and that's where you face the most important question. If nothing matters by default, what do I choose to make matter? This is where Sartre becomes more than just a philosopher. He becomes a challenger, a provocateur, a mirror that doesn't flatter. He tells you, yes, the world is absurd, yes, your being is contingent, but that doesn't mean you're powerless. It means you are radically free, and that freedom is not a luxury, it's a responsibility, because you are not just a passenger in your own life, you are the driver. You are not waiting to discover your purpose like a hidden treasure, you're inventing it, every moment, with every act of honesty, with every refusal to lie, with every trembling step into authenticity. But it's not glamorous. In fact, Sartre believed that real freedom feels like failure before it feels like liberation, because it's lonely, it's slow, it's exhausting. It means turning down opportunities that don't align. It means losing people who only knew the version of you that smiled through the lie. It means sitting in the empty room of your own being and deciding what to fill it with, not for validation, but for truth. And most terrifying of all, there are no guarantees. You can choose and still fail. You can love and still lose. You can act with courage and still be misunderstood. But Sartre said, do it anyway, because even failure, freely chosen, freely lived, is more sacred than 1,000 safe lease-in. The second half of Nausea, Roquentin begins to change, not dramatically, not heroically, but inwardly. He stops clinging. He lets the nausea do its work. He watches the world unmask itself, and slowly he begins to find beauty in the mess, not the beauty of order, but of intensity, of presence, of aliveness. He realizes that existence is not something to escape. It is something to participate in, and participation means creation. He does not become happy. He becomes awake, and maybe that's what Sartre was trying to tell us all along, that we don't need to find the meaning of life. We need to create it, not in grand gestures, but in tiny revolutions. Telling the truth when it's easier to lie, listening when it's easier to speak, walking away when everyone else stays silent. Every one of those moments is a refusal to disappear, refusal to perform, a refusal to let the absurdity of the world erase the responsibility of being fully, painfully human. And in that refusal, nausea becomes something else, not a sickness, but a signal, not an ending, but a beginning. This is where Sartre's brilliance reaches its sharpest edge, the moment when meaninglessness becomes a blank page. The nausea that once paralyzed you now carves a space clean, a brutal silence where all false comforts are stripped away. And only the trembling question remains, what will you write here? Now most will turn away. They'll rush to refill that void with anything, religion, ambition, ideology, relationships, anything to silence the roar of absurdity. But Sartre urges you, wait, sit in the discomfort, let it burn. Let the nausea empty your pockets of inherited dreams, unchosen loyalties, and second-hand selves. Because what you build after that will be truly yours. This is the existential revolution, not in the streets, but in the soul. Not against systems, but against the illusions you live by. Sartre's nausea isn't a rejection of life. It's a rejection of borrowed life, of automatic life, of the dead repetition we call normal. And maybe you've felt this too. Maybe you've sat at your desk, staring at a spreadsheet, and wondered how this became your one wild and precious life. Maybe you've walked through a party, surrounded by voices, and felt more alone than when you were actually alone. Maybe you've smiled for the camera, and behind your eyes, something screamed. That is nausea, not a pathology, but a signal from the deepest part of you, the part that still remembers what it is to feel real. Sartre isn't inviting you to despair. He's offering you a mirror, cracked and honest, where you can finally see what you are without the roles, without the noise, without the story, and what you are is free, frighteningly free. This kind of freedom is not glamorous. It's not sold in self-help books. It's not neatly aligned with goals and vision boards. It's raw. It's shapeless. It requires courage most people never know they have, because it asks you to Take ownership of a life with no script. To become the author, not the character, but how. Start small. Start close. Notice the moments when you perform. Notice the places where you lie to others, but more so to yourself. Notice when your laughter feels hollow, when your yes means no, when your ambition belongs to someone else's dream. Then choose not once, but again and again, in every moment. Sartre believed, you are making yourself, not discovering. Making, that's why he said existence precedes essence. You are not born with a fixed self. You become through your choices, through your refusals, through your actions. And you don't need to wait for the perfect plan. You don't need to find your purpose. You need to act, even clumsily, even afraid, in a way that aligns with something honest inside you. Because there's no God to assign meaning. There is no fate to guide your hand. There is only you staring into the abyss and choosing anyway. And when you begin to do this, something unexpected happens. The absurdity doesn't vanish, but it changes color. What was once terrifying begins to feel spacious. What was once meaningless begins to shimmer with potential. Not because life has handed you meaning, but because you began to craft it with your own hands. This is what Sartre meant when he said man is condemned to be free. It sounds grim, but it's a liberation. The condemnation is only this: you cannot hide, you cannot blame, you cannot outsource your soul. But the freedom, the real freedom, is that you get to choose what kind of story you become. And maybe that story doesn't need to be impressive. Maybe it just needs to be awake. Because in the end, nausea doesn't teach you how to feel better. It teaches you how to feel real. To sit in a world that is strange, heavy, absurd, and still say yes. Not because it makes sense, but because you are here, and that matters. Not to the universe, but to you. And that is enough. So now it's your turn. Tear off the borrowed mask. Stop waiting for permission. Stand inside your absurdity and move, because nausea is not the end. It's the sound of your false self dying, so that your true self can finally begin to speak. If this reached you, truly reached you, don't let it vanish. Comment the moment that woke something inside you. Subscribe for more scripts they don't want you to hear. And remember, the most dangerous soul is the one who wakes up and does not look away.